Welcome back to work. That's for the majority of Nigerians. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Business Morning. On work, off work, Business Morning is here, giving you 55 minutes of current and relevant business conversations. And we'll do it again on this episode of the program. I'm Ini John Mekwa. We start our conversation from the global space, telling you that oil prices rebounded by 1%. To end the week nearly unchanged as investors are weighing in. Of course, the quick end, probability of a quick end of Ukraine war that could bring back more Russian oil. And then we see that for this morning, that Brent features settled at $70. We have Brent back at $70. Been a while since we've seen Brent on $70. It's been hovering just about 60 and all. So it went up 1%. WTI is also up $67.18 a barrel. That's what we have here. So many issues driving that. Top on the list is the trade tariff, of course, and the impact we have seen on global economies and, of course, forecasts for the rest of the year. And then we come here to Nigeria, where Nigeria's manufacturing output rose sharply to 33.43 trillion naira in the second half of 2024, and that's a 34.9% increase, driven largely by inflation and rising prices. This is according to the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria. However, real growth was modest at 1.7%, reaching 7.78 trillion naira as challenges like high production costs and weak demand persisted. Capacity utilization improved slightly to 57%, while local sourcing of raw materials increased to 57.1%, reflecting efforts to cut reliance on costly imports. Real investment in the sector fell 35.3% year-on-year to 658.81 billion naira. And that's despite a slight recovery in the second half. Inventory of unsold goods went up 87.5%, and that value is at 2.14 trillion naira, but eased nearly 28% in the second half, suggesting pickup in sales. Man warns that inflation, forex scarcity, and low investor confidence remain major threats to the sector's growth. And talking about raw materials there, the Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise, CPPE, has rejected a bill by the Raw Materials Research and Development Council, currently before the National Assembly, seeking to ban primary product export without 30% local value addition and restrict raw material imports available locally. CPP warns that the bill could hurt exporters, risk thousands of jobs, and worsen manufacturing challenges driven by high costs, not raw material shortages. It calls the proposal simplistic and damaging. The group insists that trade policy is not what the mandate should be and urges the National Assembly to halt the bill, calling for better policy coordination and focus on boosting competitiveness. Now to a sub-national. Now the governor of Anambra State is in London in the United Kingdom, Professor Chukwuma Soludo. He's hosted members of the EU and UK-based Anambra diaspora at a town hall meeting in London. The engagement served as a platform for the governor to present his administration's 3-year scorecard and outline future priorities. He's also made a passionate appeal to the diaspora community to partner the government in sustaining the state's ongoing development momentum.
Money. And we have refused to borrow a kobo from any bank since this last year. It's deliberate. You borrow when I will say we have only 2 criteria to borrow. It has to be concessional. Number 2, it has to be project finance. We'll be able to show you how that loan will be repaid when we borrow. And I will tell you, that's why Anambra is the only state that turned down an ongoing World Bank loan that I met. Last year, they distributed 438 billion to 35 states. Anambra was the only state that did not get it. Why? I had two problems with it. When I came in, I told the country director of the World Bank, so I understand a little thing about this finance and money and so on. But from what I could understand, it was the most expensive fund in the world. You get this money in dollar terms, you convert it to me, and the official exchange rate then 406 naira to the dollar. When I knew that as day follows night, that exchange rate was going to be over 1,000 naira. And so now you give it to me. If I took it, I would have taken it at 406 or 500 and something. And now the exchange rate is about 1,600. When you start repaying, probably it will be 2,000. You know that the effective interest rate on that fund will be more than 300%. I said I was better off to borrow from a commercial bank.
The second IMF iOS CEO conference on market-based finance in Washington, D.C. is drawing attention of global financial regulators, policymakers, and industry leaders who are discussing the rapidly evolving landscape of the capital market. The conference focuses on two transformative trends: the integration of artificial intelligence in financial markets and accelerating shift from traditional mutual funds to exchange-traded funds, that's the ETFs. Key sessions at the meeting examine how artificial intelligence is reshaping market dynamics, from trading strategies to risk management, raising both opportunities and regulatory challenges. Notable speakers there include acting U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission Chair Mark Uder and IMF Financial Counselor Tobias Adrian. They're engaged in discussions about safeguarding market integrity amid technological innovation. The conference underscores the need for international cooperation to ensure that market-based finance continues to support economic growth while maintaining resilience in the face of new risks. So it's day 2 of the IMF World Bank spring meetings in Washington. That is what happened yesterday. Of course, we have a correspondent there, Sarah Chimogo, who sent in that and is on standby to keep giving us updates of what's going on there in Washington. But we know Nigeria obviously is actively participating in the meetings. The CBN governor is there, the Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister of the Economy is there. The G24 also, I believe they have their meeting later on today or tomorrow. These are areas that concern Nigeria. And we know from the speeches, the cotton raiser that we saw from both IMF and the World Bank, issues around the tariff, the threats to global economic activities and growth are top on the list. But where does Nigeria come in? What should be the focus for Nigeria? We have development economist Professor Ken Ife joining us to have this conversation. Professor Ife, good morning and welcome to the program.
Oh, thank you for having me. Thank you.
Yeah, so sometimes, it does seem as if we know that the World Bank president, Mr. Ijebanga, his own cotton raiser focused on developing and emerging economies. But sometimes it does seem like the voices of emerging economies, which Nigeria belongs to, is lost amidst global conversations, especially at a time like this when it seems the battle is really between the United States and China, and other countries are just feeling the consequences of it.
Yeah, I'm glad you put your finger on the trigger. You see, look, 4 things, for 4 years, Trump has been out of action. He was looking at 4 things he was going to do. And this is in the order of immediacy. 1, can he avert a 3rd World War? 2, I am going to start a global trade war. 3, I will move from there to a China-US economic war. And then finally, I will focus on currency war. Those are his words, those are his plans. And I tell you that why this is overshadowing the World Bank IMF meeting is because of the ramifications of what he is doing on fiscal policy, monetary policy, trade policy, industrial policy, employment policies all over the world, and then also, of course, growth policy. So all of the macroeconomic parameters, none of them is spared. They're all affected by what is going on. And I mean, Nigeria will always say, but, oh, we are going to have 14%. Forget about 14% for now. We have an import-dependent economy, and that is already hostage. So everything happening anywhere globally is hitting you simply because your economy is import-dependent. But I tell you something, one good news, to be honest with you, I mean, it's always bad news all over. But one good news is that Nigerian team are there in very high spirit, led by the Minister for the Finance and the Governor of the Central Bank. They are there in very high spirit because 4 major things have ticked excellence to what they are doing. I mean, I can tell about the Fitch rating. The Fitch rating has improved. And they are saying, well done, but you could do more. Then we have the JP Morgan that has revised our default rating, currency rating to positive, B stable, which is good. And then also warns that even though all the macroeconomic parameters that are convergent are pointing in the right direction, we should not forget that the trade balances and, of course, the balance of payment is going to come under assault, and it's happening. Then also you have the PwC's PricewaterhouseCoopers one, which is really brilliant because they went to town on strategy and analysis and then looked at matrices, 4x5 matrix of looking at impact on fiscal policy, current, all of that, beautiful analysis, but also comes to the conclusion that we are not out of the woods. We are actually just going to see the whole thing unfold. Immigration policy would affect Nigeria because it will also affect our remittances coming in. And then he pointed out all the other areas. If America pushes out more oil, we're going to be affected. Already, we are even being affected before they start pushing out more oil, because the oil price has gone down from benchmark of 75 to 60 and somewhere around there. And then you have the oil target dropping from 2.2 billion to 2 million barrels a day. We are doing about 1.45. So already I calculated the impact, fiscal impact. It showed about 36% on government revenue from oil. And then the worst case scenario came to about 65%. So all of those are all of these issues are going to be, we have to grapple with all of those. But so they are going there confident that they have done a great job, but also aware that there are still some World Bank reports saying that, well, yes, you've gained, they've removed the subsidy. There are all of those gains, but they are very, very slow in trickling down to the pot. So that's their position. But central bank in particular has never had it so good. They've had a handle now on the rates. Although the potential impact from the global trade war is going to begin to have an uptick on our rate. But what we should resist as much as possible is having a regular call on our reserves to defend Naira as such. We will. Let us.
I think there's
in a holistic sense.
Go ahead, Prof.
Okay, so that's just my little advice, that when they come back from this IMF meeting, let's try and sit back, because we are having very, very difficult time coming here, and it's going to be very consequential. If you look at some of the headwinds, every global headwind will affect Nigeria, without a doubt. But who gets affected the most? Fiscal policy will take a beating, because with all that revenue drop, and then benchmark prices, they're going to have to revise all those so that we can stay within the legal limit of deficit to GDP ratio. But in terms of the monetary policy, we're going to have a lot more challenges in the sense that we have been struggling with foreign direct investment. We also need to strategize on domestic investment. Then we also have challenges now on the portfolio investment that managed to go up to 70–80% over the last 1.5 years. Now they are going to be wanting to cash because of the turbulence in the global market. And some of them are going to be scampering for safety, running back to Federal Reserves. Because, of course, America owes 34 trillion to the world. America's, and it's even equal to the trade. Global trade is 33 trillion. America is owing 34. America owes 8.5 trillion to some countries like China, Europe, 1.5 trillion, Canada, 350 billion, Japan, 1.7 trillion, and they're taking their money out. So they owe that, but they will never pay their debt. They just print more dollars. And so what they do is that they just consume and borrow. And then wherever there's surplus, anywhere they suck it out, they borrow it. And then they're never going to repay that bill. But China manufactures and saves money, and America consumes and borrows money. So the battle line is drawn between the two. But we're going to see more of it unfold, because in the end of the day, it will migrate from tariff to direct economic confrontation between America and China, and then you now have currency war coming. So all of these are coming in drips and traps. Already the Russia and China and all the BRICS, they've taken a position. They've got to walk away from dollar dominance, global dominance of dollar. And that worries everybody, because 85% of all global transactions are done in dollar. 60% of global reserves are in dollar. 60% of global debt are denominated in dollar. America has 25% of world GDP, but only 4% of world population. You can see how they are punching above their weight. They have 13.5% of global trade. But what he doesn't realize is that a lot of it is in services. If you look at the American GDP, only 18% is on industry, 10% on manufacturing. The manufacturing sector has taken a serious beating in America, and he doesn't even realize that. In 2012, when Obama and Mitt Romney were campaigning in Texas, they were all busy blaming China for all the job losses in the industry, the car industry. But forget that automation has taken a lot of those jobs, and Americans were not investing in the car industry, automation industry. In America, they were doing that elsewhere. And then the demographic shift were ignored. Now you are going to sack 1.2 million cheap migrant labor, and then you think the wage labor bill is not going to increase. Of course it's going to increase. So there are all of this. And then in fact, if you think that you can muzzle, every car has at least 200 parts that are sourced all over the world, and you think you're going to force them to all come to America to manufacture the car, you're going to wait for a very long time, because it will take 4 to 10 years before it happens, by which time it would have left office anyway. But if you ever manufacture all the components in America, then nobody can afford that car. It has to be American billionaires that will afford a car that is 100% made in America.
In the midst of all of this, what conversations should Nigeria be having at the meetings? We know that, for instance, the CBN has held or hosted a high-level investors meeting with the likes of JP Morgan and all of that. Last year in October, when I was there, we had investors, a room filled with investors, where, they were being told what's going on in the country and areas and opportunities, So, I mean, what conversations that would be productive should Nigeria be having at the spring meeting at this time, amidst all of this, amidst the need for FDIs and all?
Yeah, they have to continue. Those agenda of continuing to massage the ego of the big boys, foreign investors, that has to continue. And then, of course, there are also African agenda, and Nigeria is a major part of that African agenda, that are looking at the debt situation. 19 African countries are melting down under the yoke of extreme debt. Then also you have the issue of people asking for IMF on to SDR, special drawing rights. So to be able to use, bring out special drawing rights and then channel it to development finance and financial institutions for concessionary kind of lending. We remember when it was used during the COVID, it was actually to help people purchase the vaccines and then also pay their debts and restructure their debts, all of that kind of stuff. So that's where they are looking to funnel that, if they agree to do that. And I think they need to, because we are yet to see the full impact of the global trade war. Their next meeting may take another 6 months. By that time, it probably would have been very late. Then you've got also the issues around climate change, that we're only getting 5.5% of funding available in climate change when we are, as a continent, losing $7 to $15 billion every year on that. And we take the greatest hit from that. So all of these agendas, Nigeria are part of those. So we'll continue to talk. But I have to tell you something. If we have two ministers in the trade, industry, and investment, I think the senior minister should continue to talk and work with the others on global financial things and all of that. Let the junior minister go and face African countries. Go around, we have 52 weeks in a year, 53 African, go to each African country once a week, carry your businessmen, carry your chamber of commerce and man people, go and visit them and get them to come and visit us. When they come and their businesses come here, take them to the industrial parks, go and talk partnership with these people and take it seriously, because our future doesn't lie in messing about with trade and all that stuff and waiting to react or don't react about what Don is doing. Our future lies in look inwards, identify the strength we have, find who is manufacturing and coping with infrastructure challenge, and then build strong ecosystem around that. Look for the African countries you can push products to. Look at the ones that can come in as partners. That is where you're going to focus the energy. So that's why I'm not mincing words. Let the junior minister go and face that and talk Africa all over the place and not go into all this, all that. Go now, that the time is running out. And if you want me to give you an example of what I think we should be doing, is find those manufacturing outfits, because our problem is value addition. That's why we are still import dependent. Find who has succeeded and overcome infrastructure challenge, and then build a cluster and ecosystem around that company that has succeeded. To give you an example, Dangote put $20 billion in Lekki. Lekki is a free trade zone. Why don't you get the minister and get all the gladiators and have MSMEs surround them in that area and work for $50 billion ecosystem, and they will take off because you got the infrastructure. If he has 500 megawatts of power, marginal cost of producing extra 200 is very little. So you can get traction. If you go to Texas only gets 20 the reserve of is 20 billion barrels of, Nigeria has 37.5 billion barrels. They have 32 refineries in Texas. They have almost 5,000 petrochemical industries of one form or the other, all in there. That is the vision that should be facing that Lekki, because you have a hegemon right in the middle of them that are dropped 20 billion. Get all our people around. Some will come upstream, some will come midstream, some will come downstream, so that you can have vibrant industries doing something and not talking. There's no time to talk. If they want to talk, let them talk. But the CBN is actually doing its best, and then it will find their level in a strategy of that nature. Because all you say to CBN, resolve the finances, access to finance and all the fund flow in that clause. And they will do that. They're already doing something significant.
All right, Prof, thank you so much for that. We hope both ministers are hearing you and they will take what part they think is important. Because, I mean, as you said, the obvious thing now is that Africa has to look inwards. Arrangement of it, I guess, depends on both ministers. So thank you so much, Professor Kenife, a development economist, for your views this morning.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so we are still going to stay, of course, related to this. We have another economist, that's Mr. Bismarck Rwani, also joining us to get his views on some of these meetings and other issues. Mr. Rwani, good morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning, Nini. Thank you for having me this morning.
Great. So, I mean, Professor Eke was just talking about, you know, the talks and all of that and what should be the focus for Nigeria at this time, at the spring meetings. What for you should be the focus?
I think, again, the focus is about maintaining domestic economic stability. The entire world is roiled by what's happening between Jerome Powell and President Trump. the tariffs and the reciprocal tariffs, the trade wars. So there's nothing we can do about that. We are too small, too irrelevant to have an impact. So what we need to do is to ask ourselves where our strengths are. Our strengths are that we are producing oil. The price of oil has, according to you, it's increased to $70 a barrel. But the dollar of today, the dollar you earn today, is equivalent to 90% of the value of the dollar 4 weeks ago. Therefore, even though your nominal price of oil is $70 a barrel, the effective price and the relative price of oil is down to about $62 a barrel. Because at that time, the pound was trading at about 1.24, 1.25. Today, the pound is trading at about 1.33 to the dollar. So the dollar has become a weaker currency, and it's become a problem. So effectively, our buffers, which we have, our reserves, are not as robust as they were, because the value of what we have has actually dropped. But this is a temporary phenomenon. What I'm saying is that at this point in time, we should be focusing on the production of oil so that our fiscal deficit is not in a negative position. And also, we can see that our imports are beginning to drop sharply. So generally speaking, I look at what we can do. Today, our money supply growth, which was just announced, is at 24% higher than last year's 114 trillion. Once your money supply begins to grow, you now need to tighten a little bit to bring some stability in that system. Cash outside the cash, the M1, which is cash, is actually about almost 5.4 trillion, almost 6 trillion naira compared to what it was last year. So there's a lot of cash in the system. There is a money supply is growing, even though compared to 2024 it's lower, but it is a major threat. So once your money supply begins to grow at this rate, and your oil production is dropping to about 1.4 million barrels, it means the pressure on your currency is going to continue. We can see that our gross reserves have actually dropped below $38 billion, about $37.2 billion right. So there are some threats, but the good thing is that the threats are not as potent as they were at this time last year. Therefore, our ability to navigate ourselves out of this global crisis and domestic crisis is much stronger today than it was last year. That is the truth. That's the true picture.
All right, Mr. Rwani, you talked about money supply, and I'm sure you saw at the end of the mission 4 by the IMF to Nigeria, they shared their observations and recommendations, and of course, one of it is to keep a tight stance. That's the CBA and the MPC should keep a tight stance. We've seen that for many months now. We've heard applause for the reforms. Does it mean we're missing it somewhere? That's why we still have this increase. I mean, 24% increase in 1 month. Isn't that a whole lot? I mean,
that is a whole lot. And why is it happening?
Yes.
Because there's some fiscal laxity there. So we need to tighten up the fiscal space, right? So that there are less leakages and that there's more control over fiscal spending and the pass-through effect of high-powered money into the system. So whether we like it or not, that is the reality. But it could have been worse if we did not do what we did. If the central bank did not do what it did last year and early this year, can you imagine what it would have been? So I think that's the first thing. We are not as vulnerable. In fact, only 2 African countries are listed as most vulnerable. I think one of it, Botswana, and another one. Now, the thing is that Nigeria is not listed as one of the vulnerable countries. As a matter of fact, Nigeria is listed as one of the countries that can withstand this shock. So what we need to do is to come back domestically and ensure that 2 things happen. 1, we control money supply growth by tightening a little bit. 2, that we do something about our oil production so that there are no leakages at the wellhead. So if you do that, then your fiscal deficit as a percentage of GDP is not going to be as high as anticipated. Also, I will not be surprised if we have to have a supplementary budget to actually rein in some of the expenditure that we had planned that we will do. we may have to cut back on some of those things because our revenues are not going to be as robust as we originally anticipated when we started this project. And this happened to this is the same thing that's happening to all the countries in the world. That is, everybody's having to come back and recalibrate based on what is happening to the U.S. economy. Although I believe that the U.S. The volatility in the U.S. market is going to be temporary. That within there's a 90-day suspension on the tariffs. I think that we will come to some kind of resolution, and therefore the dip in economic activity, global economic activity, will not be as much as widely feared today. So if that is the case, then we can easily raise our heads and then begin to grow as fast as we can, as we anticipated before the tariff wars and the trade wars.
So one of the consequences of the trade war going on is we've seen the dollar sink. I think the last story I saw about that, it went down to a 7-month low. And then we see emerging economies, even a lot of Asian, like the yen is looking so well. But, you know, one will have to take some steps back to ask, are those emerging economic currency or even the Asian, are they really gaining value? Or is it just because the dollar is sinking? So we don't get excited for nothing.
No. You see, this is not the first time we face this kind of problem. The reality is that the dollar has lost value because of the uncertainty and the volatility index that is shown. But if you discount all of that and say, okay, let us assume that in the next month or so things will stabilize, the dollar will find its true value. The Chinese are also using their currency value, what we call competitive devaluation, beggar thy neighbor policy, to actually undercut, right, and gain market share in the export of goods. So in a time of a trade crisis and a tariff crisis, you don't make long-term decisions. You just wait for it to blow over, and then you go back to normal. We've been here before. In 1998, when there was a major crisis, we were here in 1987. We were here in 2008. We were here during the COVID pandemic. And so this is not, the world is not coming to an end because of this, what I call a temporary issue. I think that all you have to do is fast forward and say, what is the market going to be looking like? What are these economies going to be looking like at the end of June, at the end of the first half of this year? Our projections are that things will be normal, but not the old normal. In other words, some of the loss of confidence will have a much more structural effect on the US dollar and the US economy than we thought. But generally speaking, the world economy is not going to go away because there's a change of the tariff arrangements. This happened in August 1971, when the US suspended the convertibility of the US dollar to gold and also imposed a 10% tariff on all imports. That was by Richard Nixon in August 1971. We are here again 60 years later, and we are dealing with the same problem. How do we now make the currency? The price of gold is at 3,400 naira per ounce, which is the highest level it has been since we ever knew since gold was being traded. We've seen the price of cocoa at $9,000 a ton, which is great for Nigeria. But Nigeria is going to be earning about almost $2.5 billion from cocoa exports. It's going to be earning about almost $3 billion from fertilizer exports. It's going to be earning a lot. So our non-oil exports are going to be growing. Our imports, on the other hand, have come down because our currency is weaker than it was. So from a balance of payment perspective, the Nigerian economy is much stronger than it was. And when you begin to reflect on that and bring it down home, we are facing inflationary pressures right now because of supply output shortages. We are facing inflationary pressures because of power supply problems. But we are also beginning to see the Dangote group actually bringing down the price of petrol and bringing down the price of diesel. So Nigeria is benefiting to some extent from the activities of the Dangote refinery. On one hand, bringing down the cost of logistics. On the other hand, the stable naira, the foreign exchange market has helped to bring inflation. In spite of all of this, we are beginning to see inflation begin to rear its head again. And that is a big danger. So our focus as a country now is how do we control domestic inflation, food inflation, output, and ensure that we bring our fiscal deficit under control. If we don't do any of these things, then this may be another missed or lost opportunity.
Yeah, Mr. Arwani, I'm glad you said that, because at the last inflation number that we saw, obviously there was an increase, and I mean, from calculation, that's even before the impact of the trade war. We've seen the Naira drop to 1,006 and has stayed there now for like 2 weeks. Of course, in between, even though now we have a reduction in the price of petrol, we also had a bit of increase then when the crude for Naira policy was not reactivated. So we haven't seen those numbers reflect in the inflation number. So most likely the next inflation number might be up again. And of course,
it's going to be higher. It's going to be higher, definitely. It's going to be higher.
Exactly. And so that also feeds to the interest rates and the MPC meeting later on next month. Doesn't that take us back to where we were before, even though, you know, we are supposed to be counting the gains of the reforms?
No, it is true. It's not the fact that inflation changes direction 1 month or 2 months based on certain parameters does not mean that the war against inflation has been lost. What it means is that you've got to do some more to bring it back to the normal trend. The trend of inflation, we are convinced that the trend of inflation is going to moderate this year, but not at this time. We have some issues to deal with. We have the money, we just talked about money supply. We talked about leakages, we talked about power supply. We talked about logistics. So there are some things that need to be done, that must be done, but the most important thing is to agree and believe that the war is never over until the fat lady sings. You never say it's over. Now, so the central bank has to maintain its autonomy, its independence, and keep their anchor expectations. But the fiscal authorities have to do something about leakages and wastages. And that in the end, we've seen a change on the board and structure of the NMPC. Institutional reform is necessary at this time, because if oil production continues to drop, if there are fiscal leakages, then we will have a problem. So I'm confident that the fiscal authorities know exactly what's going on. That's why everybody's in Washington trying to ensure that things stay straight and narrow. And the IMF was very clear in its article review that we must do something about managing inflation expectations, about managing our buffers, and making sure that the impact of these reforms is transferred and distributed to the people, so that the widening gap between the haves and the have-nots in Nigeria, and the widening gap between opportunities for growth, it begins to narrow. Because if we don't do something about this, like I said at the beginning, this might be another missed opportunity. We don't want to go into the next phase of the struggle. That's how to reduce oil supply problems. We already have enough problems in River State, in Delta State now, in Escravos. You see the problems between the militants and ex-militants and new militants. All of this means that you cannot afford to have oil production at the 1.4 million barrels a day level. We need to be more like 1.7 million barrels of oil, especially now that the pricing pressure is on us. We have our work cut out for us. But the beauty is that because we did some things last year, we have some buffers that can to make us withstand those shocks. And you can see that if you look at the price of commodities that are shown on the screen, you will see that some of those commodities are beginning to increase. And the most dangerous thing today is that we have month-on-month inflation of 3.5%. When you annualize that, it gives you a 58% rate of inflation. So if monthly inflation annualized is at 58%, and annual inflation year on year is showing you 24%, the difference is almost double. It means that the structural problems, structural impediments to output are still potent, and that we have to do something. We have our work cut out for us in terms of bringing inflation down. Inflation is not going to come down as long as you have those structural problems, as long as month-on-month inflation is beginning to show those signs. And all those things that we talked about earlier on, because the inflation of March was the one that captured the fasting period. Now tariffs are kicked in. We've seen the price of oil, petrol is now $8.90. That's good. It's better than $925. But it will take time. Prices are sticky downwards, and it will take time before we begin to see those benefits. So right now, everybody should fasten their seatbelt for a bumpy 1 or 2 months ahead of us.
All right, so we'll tighten our seatbelt. So, I mean, the expectation of domestic commodities, reducing in price, we should we should hold forth for that and wait for a bit.
I don't think it will reduce in price, but the rate of increase in price of domestic commodities is not going to be as rapid as we saw last year. So inflation measures have changed, and therefore, let's not get, let's not start celebrating. We should just monitor it, and hopefully, with money supply tightness, with fiscal responsibility kicking in, especially at the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Industry, then we might begin to have some room to maneuver, and hopefully, the global tariff war, 90-day period will come and go, and we'll be back as close as possible to normal. So I don't want us to be to be doomsday analysts. We should be what we consider. We should be realistic rather than pessimistic at this time.
Yeah, but we should also face reality, Mr. Ruwani.
That's what I'm saying. We are being realistic.
We still have to face the reality, our reality at this time.
Absolutely. That's what.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Bismarck Ruwani, Chief Executive Officer of Financial Derivatives Company, for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we head straight to the global news scene. Let's stay with us. Business Morning here on Channels Television. See what's happening in the global space now. From the United States, yes, the dollar sank to a fresh 7-month low. This was the safe haven yen as President Donald Trump's unrelenting attacks on the Federal Reserve Chairman this time. That is eroding investor confidence in the United States economy. The U.S. currency accelerated losses after Thailand's Prime Minister also said that the trade negotiation with Washington has been postponed. The dollar sank to as much as 0.6% to touch the key psychological 140 yen level for the first time since mid-September. And the U.S. currency eased 0.1 to 0.8082 Swiss francs. That's not far from a decade low that it had previously reached. The euro was a little changed at $1.01 after jumping to $1.15 on Monday for the first time since November 2021. The sterling gained 0.25%. That's $1.34 after surging as high as $1.34 for the first time since September to start the week. So the United States is also facing some of the losses that global economies are facing, especially now that President Trump is looking inwards for the attack. It's not doing the country a lot of good. Talking about the yen, the currency advanced past the psychological level of 140 against the dollar amid threats to the independence of the Federal Reserve and its heightened risks concerning tariffs, with a meeting between the finance chiefs of Japan and the U.S. ahead. Japan's currency appreciated as much as 0.7% to 139.9 against the dollar. That's the strongest level since September. And the move came after the currency had paused just before 140, where some traders were defending option positions. And the yen is the best performing among the group of 10 pairs against the dollar today. Last week, President Donald Trump touted big progress in tariff talks with Japan in one of the first rounds of face-to-face negotiations since the barrage of duties on global imports roiled markets and stoked recession fears. Also, a high-level Japanese delegation is set to deliver a letter from Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba to Chinese leader Xi Jinping this week as Tokyo strives to avoid getting caught in the crossfire of escalating trade friction between China and the U.S. I know China has also sent out a warning for countries to be careful not to step on China while trying to be on the good side of the U.S. Now, court has blocked DOGE access to sensitive personal data. Federal High Court once again blocked the Department of Government Efficiency staffers operating inside the Social Security Administration from accessing sensitive personal data of millions of Americans. As a result, DOGE will have to comply with certain legal requirements when accessing data. The order applies specifically to SSA employees and who are working on the DOGE agenda. The lawsuit was brought by American Federation of States, County and Municipal Employees, and the American Federation of Teachers Alliance for Retired Americans also are part of it. They are represented by National Legal Organization Democracy Forward. The plaintiffs argue that DOGE actions violate the Privacy Act, Social Security Act, and Internal Revenue Code and Administrative Procedure Act. The order blocks the agency and its agents and employees from granting access to systems containing personally identified information, including social security numbers, medical records, mental health records, employer and employee payment records, employee earnings, addresses, bank records, tax information, and family court records. So that seems to be like a hindrance to DOGE and its work. South Korea's acting president, Han Duck-soo, expects this week's trade talks with the United States to pave the way for a mutually beneficial outcome. And U.S. President Donald Trump imposed reciprocal tariffs of 25% on imports of goods from South Korea earlier this month, which have been paused for 90 days. And tariffs on the auto and steel sectors remain at 25%. The meeting was scheduled at the request of the U.S., and they said that it will be held in Washington on April 24. That's a couple of days from now, like 2 days from now. Industry Minister will also attend the joint meeting with the U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer. Talks are expected to cover reciprocal tariff exemptions or reductions, plus duties on cars and steel. The Industry Minister says that it's separately that a specific agenda was being coordinated with the U.S. and has yet to be confirmed. Finance negotiations with Washington on steep trade tariffs were postponed because the United States had asked Bangkok to review important issues. The Prime Minister said this and shared this with the media. A new meeting date was being scheduled. She said that the previous date for the talks that was supposed to be tomorrow, April 23, has been postponed. Thailand is among the Southeastern Asian nations hardest hit by United States Donald Trump's measures, facing a 36% tariff if a reduction cannot be negotiated before the global moratorium, which expires in July. The United States was Thailand's largest export market last year, accounting for 18.3% of total shipments. That's about $54.96 billion. And Washington has put its deficit with Thailand at $45.6 billion. Thai rice export fell 30% in the first quarter and could come full-year forecast of 7.5 billion metric tons over the tariffs, according to Rice Export Association. And some things also happening in the U.S. Tesla shares fell almost 6% on Monday, a day ahead of the electric vehicle company's first quarter earnings report. Analysts fret over ongoing brand erosion. That's what they call it. The stock closed at $227.5, leaving it less than $6 above its low for the year on April 8th. The shares are now down 45% for the year, after wrapping up their worst quarter since 2022 in March. It's the 12th time this year that the stock has dropped by at least 5% in a single session. The CEO, Elon Musk, the head of DOGE, they say has many distractions outside of Tesla, especially the role within the Trump administration, along with the company's progress on robot taxi and self-driving technology for its existing cars. So is the CEO too distracted to focus on Tesla? Is that why? Or is it the sentiment around the Trump administration, which he has become a part of, that's driving down the price of Tesla. Now, shares of Chinese companies tied to cross-border trade, including logistics and payment processing, jumped after the government sought to combat U.S. tariffs with plans of promote free trade zone activities and service industries. The Chinese government issued a notice to upgrade its free trade pilot program, including more support for digital trade. And among the measures considered are ways to help biopharmaceutical companies import items for research and development and allow qualified firms in the zone to provide film post-production services. Still in China, the country has announced that it will impose sanctions on U.S. congressmen, officials, heads of non-governmental organizations for their behavior on Hong Kong-related issues. The move came after Washington already sanctioned 6 senior Chinese and Hong Kong officials earlier this month, citing transnational repression and further erosion of Hong Kong's autonomy. The U.S. accused Beijing and Hong Kong officials of using Hong Kong national security laws extraterritorially to intimidate, silence, and harass 19 pro-democracy activists who were forced to flee overseas, including a U.S. citizen and 4 other U.S. residents. China's latest move is an addition to an already escalating trade war between the 2 biggest global economies. Now, Meta Platforms Incorporated, TikTok and Snap are questioning the integrity of Australia's looming social media ban for under 16s after it emerged that Communications Minister Michelle Rowland made a personal pledge to YouTube's boss to exempt the platform before a consultation process on the carve-out had begun. In a December 9 letter to YouTube Chief Executive Officer Neil Mohan, a copy of which was obtained under Freedom of Information, Rowland said that she was writing to reaffirm the commitment that the government would exclude YouTube from the ban. Her assurance came days after the legislation passed Australia's parliament, but weeks before Rowland's own department sought feedback on the proposed exemption. So this social media ban in Australia, and it's for children under the age of 16. Raising a lot of dust there, but we'll see how it ends. But that's where we'll end Business Morning this morning. Thank you so much for being a part of the program. 55 minutes, hope it was worth your time. We have another 55 minutes coming at 1 p.m. Then you will get updates from the world of business. Anita will be here. Markets are open today. We'll see how the markets are faring. Are they part of the conversation going on in Washington? We'll see at 1 p.m. I'm John McQuarrie. I'll talk to you then.